I just really want to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank Rachel for helping me do this party. I think that there must be somewhere like where Shakespeare talks about acquiring a friend and a teacher.
Oh, sure.
So I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know the lines, and you'll have to tell me later on. So anyway, I think that I've been very lucky to acquire a friend and a teacher.
Totally mutual. Totally mutual. Well, I have to say, I wish I'd chosen a different play. I wish I'd chosen a comedy. You know, not that the comedies are that much easier. Like, Twelfth Night is very profound as well. But I've really been struggling with this play for the last 2 weeks. I've been working on it very, as Elisheva can bear out, very intensively for the last 2 weeks. And it is, I would say, it has been a struggle for various reasons. First of all, it is a very, very painful play, terribly painful. It's a cosmic play. There's a whole universe here, right? It's painful because it deals with the most basic relationships in life, parents and children. And though we not all have been parents, all of us have been children of parents, right? And I think that another factor in making it so difficult now is age. I'm at a very different stage in life. I'm older than Lear was, although we don't know quite how old he was. He says 80 and upwards, which means he's over 80. Well, I'm already considerably over 80. And I think that the sense of identification with someone who is growing and feels so much that he is growing increasingly feeble and helpless has also added to the personal difficulty of grappling with the play. It seems such a simple play, you know. It's about what are the topics? A father and his children, right? 2 cases. It's got a sort of folk tale nature about it. We know so many stories in which 2 or usually 3 children, it's usually 3 children, but not always, right? In which one of them is despised or rejected or has to set out on some kind of task, right? The fulfillability of which is in question. And although having originally been cast out, and though having the siblings, his siblings, usually his, this is a rare case of the children being daughters, right? Usually it's sons, which was also, I think, interesting about the play. After having been rejected, returning in order either to triumph, right, to prove that he has achieved whatever he was intended to accomplish, or, as in this case, to succor the parent whom the other trusted siblings have in some way failed or betrayed. So there's a very basic archetypal pattern here, I think, which again increases the sense of universality of the play. And I've heard this story before somewhere, right? By the way, Shakespeare, as usual in his plays, did base himself on a prior text. He very seldom, except in The Tempest. The Tempest is the only one of his plays, it's his last play, where he really made up the plot. He thought up the plot. In almost every other, not in almost, in every other case, he based himself on an earlier work. And in fact, one of the fascinating things is to compare what he did with that earlier work and how much greater it is in his hands. You know, what a superb, extraordinary, unique creator he was. I think that's another thing that overwhelms one with this play. You know, as I say, the cosmic quality of it. And the way in which he here has created, I think, an entire universe. This is the sense that I have about the play. I don't know, I know I won't be able to do it justice. Ultimately, this play deals with the human condition. And I think this is, you know, it's not just fathers, children, it's not just children, fathers. It's, as I say, the human condition. And some very, very irresolvable questions, existentialist issues, right? The major one of which, as I will eventually, I hope, come to, is the, you know, this basic question we have to ask ourselves, particularly, I would say, in a post-Holocaust period. I think that that's another thing that makes this play more painful. It's the question which the Elizabethans phrase as unde malum, whence evil, right? And as Shakespeare, as Lear at one point says, what is in nature makes these hard hearts. What is, how, why, where does this evil stem from? How is it possible that any human being can commit the kind of monstrous acts, right, which are presented in the play? I just want to mention two experiences of mine with Lear. When I was in my first year at Cambridge, and that must have been my second year because we were studying Lear, I had an opportunity to see it performed by someone who was at the time considered quite a good actor, first-rank actor, not in the Olivier class, but Olivier at that time also had not quite yet achieved the peak of his career. This was an actor-manager called Donald Wolfe. It was playing in the Arts Theatre in Cambridge, and I had a ticket. And I got as far as the entrance to the theatre, and I couldn't make myself go in. I couldn't face it. I already knew the text. I knew there was going to be a searing scene like the blinding of Gloucester. I just couldn't take it physically. In any case, I find physical cruelty very, viscerally very painful, and I usually close my eyes. I'm always amazed now when I see what my grandchildren watch, and I just can't believe. No, because they become inured to it, you know, and then when you say something, they say, oi safta zerak seret, zerak. But of course it isn't, you know, this is reality. It may be a play, but it's reality. This play is reflecting, as I say, particularly post-Holocaust, right? The way, the sheer animal bestiality to which human beings are capable of sinking, right? And the other experience is seeing Michael Redgrave at Stratford, in a very fine performance of Lear, at the end of which, as we filed out of the theatre, I noticed that nobody was looking at anybody else. Everyone was going out with downcast eyes, as if completely focused on the inner experience, and this is interesting given what starts the tragedy moving, the inability to speak, the inability to express the feelings that filled us as we left the theatre. I was with my brother, and I remember that inability to communicate afterwards went on even after we were out of the theatre. Right? So those two experiences, I think, for me, certainly confirmed, reflected, thank you, dear, the extraordinary difficulty of Lear. And the other thing is as I've already said, I think that one's interpretation changes with time, and that either I have achieved, I hope, some kind of insight, or at least I have a very different perspective on Lear from the one I had when I was young, and thought, how stupid of Cordelia not to do what he expected her to do, which is, of course, a point that one can raise, right? She knew what was expected of her, so why didn't she do it, right? Idiot, right? At the end, Edgar, who has succored his father, as eventually Cordelia does as well, right, confesses, right, that, we'll come to it. He confesses that he made a mistake in not revealing himself to Gloucester, because when he finally revealed himself, Gloucester's is also a wonderful expression. Gloucester's heart, twixt two extremities of joy and grief, burst smilingly. And if I can just here also draw a reference from my own life, my mother experienced what was actually her final heart attack very soon after she discovered mutual rediscovery, her oldest sister. In both cases, each had assumed the other dead, and suddenly they were reunited. And as I drove, I was pregnant at the time, my doctor drove us to the hospital behind the ambulance, and I said to him, this is so terrible, she's just rediscovered the sister, and it's been so wonderful to have this supposedly dead relationship revived. And he said to me something I'll never forget. Oh, the human heart cannot bear such extremes. It's like taking a hot glass and putting it on a cold surface. And I think that phrase that he uses, his heart twixt two extremes of joy and grief, his heart burst smilingly. The ideal thing would be for us to show the play, right, with me giving the footnotes as we go along. No, really, I was very glad to hear from Sally that some of you have been watching the play. I hope some of you will also be reading it, because I doubt very much whether any of the versions that you've seen are the full play. It's a long play, and particularly in the last act, as I hope I'll get around to showing, Shakespeare deliberately provides a rather lengthy break in what I suppose one could call the main action of Lear and Cordelia, right? And you feel there's great suspense there, because it's that whole section where Edgar comes forward and challenges Edmund, and Edmund is first accused by Albany of treason. In other words, Edmund is revealed. Edgar comes forward to challenge him. There's the battle, and a lot of stuff goes on before Edmund finally says, "Oh, yet some good I mean to do," right? And we know, we've heard him give the order. He didn't explicitly give the captain the order to go and hang Cordelia, but we know that he gave some kind of order, which, knowing Edmund and his basic villainy, right, and of course his having sent them off to prison in the first place, right, we suspect does not augur well, but we're distracted from that by all these things that are going on with the subplot, which was essentially a parallel plot, right? And then comes that extraordinary image, a kind of reverse pietà of the father carrying the dead daughter. And I think purposely, no, I don't think a great artist does things on purpose. I don't know whether any, Linda, you might, I mean, you probably refine it, redefine it, but there's a certain spontaneity about this, right? Then comes the end. But we'll get to the end eventually. What I'm going to do, since we haven't got the film here, and since I assume the time and perhaps patience, which is a major theme in the play, right? Patience I need, he says. Oh, you gods, give me patience I need. Okay, so I hope you've all got some conception of Lear in your mind now, and I want to begin at the beginning. Sometimes, interesting enough, in stage performances, the producers, nowadays we have directors and producers who don't always know exactly what they should be doing, and although more and more directors now spend time actually thinking about the play, I think, before directing it, nevertheless, there's a tendency to cut out the first scene, the very first scene. And the very first scene, the opening of scene one, is important. It's that little exchange between Gloucester and Kent. You know? Because right at the beginning, we are told, right, that we know that it's Lear's intention to divide the kingdom. And they comment on the fact that, well, we always thought that he preferred Albany, but in this division of the kingdom, they're going to get the same share, right? So we know, right, that. We also know that Gloucester is a person who has begotten a bastard child, a mere year or so younger than his legitimate child. So you wonder, was this a case of adultery, perhaps, right? Okay. Or just as he calls, he sort of brushes it off. There was, the had a wonderful time, his mother was fair and so on. But there's already an act of illegitimacy even before the division of the kingdom. Now, when as the play opens then, you have to ask ourselves, all right, so what is the particular act? And because I said at the beginning, many of us may be tempted to say, why doesn't Cordelia do as she wishes? What actually is being done here? Lear is going to, again, I mean, every line needs some kind of explication, I'm sorry. If you've got the text, it's Act 1, Scene 1, line 38, right? Meantime, we shall express our darker purpose. And he takes the map, right? And he says, right, know that we have divided in three our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburthened, crawl toward death. Now, you think he's perceiving of himself as, a poor old man already, right, crawling toward death, right? And initially, okay, so we know he's going to divide his kingdom, but on what basis? Okay. There's going to be a test, the love test, right? Which of you, shall we say, does love us most, right? That's the test. So it's going to be a test of speech. He wants, remember, the whole court is assembled here in public to witness this division of the kingdom. And incidentally, giving how fairly fresh in Elizabethan minds the concept of civil war and division of kingdoms still was, I think that the Elizabethans couldn't have thought very well of anybody actually dividing a kingdom which had only about 100 years ago been united. But again, if we go at this rate through the whole play, we'll never finish it. And in fact, Sally, I was thinking we need a week. At least. But I'll try and get as fast as possible today. So here's Lear. He wants everybody to know how much his daughters love him, right? It's pride, it's selfishness, right? I want everybody to hear this. It doesn't, not even in private. Everybody, the whole court's here. And sure enough, Regan and Goneril, well, Goneril first because she's the oldest, right, go through their paces. They do exactly what he expects. And they speak with a hyperbole, which is just almost ridiculous, right? You know, I mean, it's obviously, it can't be. You can already, right? I love you more than word could wield. But nevertheless, she now goes on to wield the words, right? Okay? Dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty, beyond what can be valued, rich or rare, no less than life, with grace, health, beauty, honor, as much as child e'er loved or father found, a love that makes breath poor and speech unable. Okay, but nevertheless she's speaking, right? Okay, now this is important given what happens. Regan follows suit. Now immediately after Goneril has spoken, Lear already gives her portion, right? And then he turns to Regan. And she says, and again, I want you to notice the imagery here, I am made of that self-metal, which means material, but metal, right, when it sounds like metal, right, the substance we know, and prize me at her worth. There's an imagery here of material wealth, right? She talks about a deed of love. A deed of love is also a contract, right? Okay, and I profess myself an enemy to all other joys which the most precious square of sense professes, and find I am alone felicited. Listen to that high-flown language, right? The use of Latinate words, right? There, as I said before, the hyperbola. And then comes Cordelia. So 2 portions have already been allocated, right? And now it's quite clear what Lear is expecting, because he says to Cordelia, now our joy, although our last and least, to whose young love the vines of France and milk of Burgundy strive to be interest, what can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sister? Speak. Nothing. Okay? And then comes that fascinating, I mean, look at that exchange there. You know, first of all, the simplicity of the word, nothing. Nothing, my lord. Nothing? Nothing. Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again. What exactly does that mean, nothing will come of nothing? Does nothing come of nothing? From what? This was a very, yes. Speak a bit louder. One of the things that happens as you grow older is that you lose some of your hearing.
You won't get anything if you don't try, so you have to try again.
Okay, good. In other words, if you want something, you have to do something, right? Fine. Now, this was a very interesting theological argument. From what did God create the world? Right? Okay? Nothing. Chaos, right? So something can come out of nothing. Or can it? Right? Let's come back to that eventually, that no thing, right? Because that is what nothing is, right? And how does Cordelia explain her inability? Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. Right? I love your majesty according to my bond. Now, he has referred already, we've had the word deed, right, in Regan's response. What is a bond? A bond has several meanings. A bond, first of all, is a contract, again, right? A bond is a tie. Right? The bonds of love, the bonds of family, right? According to my bond. In other words, but here she's using it, he assumes, and she in fact interprets it, right, as a contract. You have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as our right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. Now, bear in mind that it's been changed now, but the original Christian vow of marriage that a woman the bride was supposed to express was to love, honor, and obey her husband. The obey has now been dropped, right? Okay, no, it's interesting. I don't know whether any of you watched the royal wedding, but in other words, what she is citing is exactly what her sisters or any bride would have said. Right? She's saying, I feel towards you exactly what I should feel to you, which is also what my sisters should be feeling for their husbands. And that's why she goes on to say, why have my sisters husbands if they love you all alone? Right? Sure, when I shall wed, she says, that Lord that marries, we will take half my love with him. Right? And he totally fails to understand. There is the absence of understanding. It's not the absence of understanding of Cordelia. It's not what we might say, no, for heaven's sake, why doesn't she do it, right? First of all, she can't, right? She cannot speak, and we'll see that also at the end. Cordelia cannot heave her heart into my mouth the moment she is face to face with Lear at the end, right? Or the two of them, as it were, alone, right? She speaks, and speaks very eloquently when nobody is listening, when there's no one there to hear her, right? When the gentleman first describes how she received the news of Lear's madness. He says, you know, a tear fell from her eyes. A word escaped her lip, Father, Father. She was incapable of speaking while anyone was around. First of all, the feeling, again, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. Right? And also when they meet again at the end, the inability to speak. And language is a very, very central theme in this play, of course, right? How do we speak? When do we speak? What do we speak? Right? I found, by the way, a wonderful quotation. It's interesting how one comes across things by chance that prove to be apposite. This is a quotation from Heschel, writing about Yiddish, right? Thus there arose, as though spontaneously, a mother tongue, a direct expression of feeling, a mode of speech without ceremony or artifice, a language that speaks itself without taking devious paths, a tongue that has a maternal intimacy and warmth. Right? In this language, you say beauty and mean spirituality, you say kindness and mean holiness. Few languages can be spoken so simply and so directly. There are but few languages which lend themselves with such difficulty to falseness. Right? And he comes eventually to the sound oi. Right? Really, because they say, right? Sorrow was their second soul, and their vocabulary, the vocabulary of their heart, the vocabulary of the Jew's heart, consisted of one word, oi, a mixture of joy, sadness, and enthusiasm. It is a cry he's referring here to that emanates from all of Soutine's paintings. This is someone writing about Soutine. Right? In one word, oi, right, Jews express so much, right? Really, I think this joy, sadness, and enthusiasm. Think about when we use that, right? Even joy. Oi! You know, how wonderful it was. And oi, and oi. Oy vey. Right?
I'm struck
So-
by the fact that King Lear says nothing with an exclamation point. There's no question mark. When she says nothing, like
Well, no, in my edition, the first nothing is nothing. The first one, when she says nothing, he says, nothing? You can't believe it. It's incredulity. Harrison, look, we haven't got Shakespeare's text. I mean, we have the folio. Oh, God, let me go back. Shakespeare wrote for a theatre company, right? He didn't write in order to be published, right? He was writing for a group of actors. He wrote apparently in enormous haste. According to Ben Jonson, he never blotted his copybook. He never bothered to correct the proofs. And how many of us can say that about what we write, right? Okay. It was all there. The texts, when they were very successful, some of them were published illegally, right, in a quarto edition. Right? But a proper edited edition of Shakespeare did not appear till 7 years after his death, and it was put together by two of the actors who remembered part of the plays by heart. There was, of course, a text. There must have been a proof copy. I mean, but when an actor learns a part, he or she doesn't learn the whole play. They learn their part. Right? And so, for example, when it comes to Hamlet, we have 3 versions of Hamlet even before we get to the final folio version. Right? And then the argument is, which was the correct text? And I would say, if I were acting Lear, I would definitely say in incredulity, nothing. Then comes, nothing shall come of nothing. Speak again, right? That command, that imperiousness of Lear, right? The imperiousness and the instant flying into a fury. When he asks her, but goes thy heart with this? Aye, my good Lord. So young and so untender, so young, my Lord, and true. And immediately comes this furious response, which we'll see recurring over and over with each of the daughters, right? There's no stopping. He is a man whose passions totally control him, right? And the main passion here is a sense of self, right? Of selfishness, of self-aggrandizement, I would say, of wanting to prove to the world how much his daughters love him. Okay? Imperiousness, the desire for rule, and yet at the same time wanting to give up the rule, to preserve what? 100 nights, to retire, right? He says also, right, and this is the tragedy of it, right? It's a wonderful line. I sought to set my rest on her kind nursery. Now, what had he been planning? I sought to set my rest on her kind nursery. Cordelia would be like the mother nurturing her old father. That was what he intended, to retire and have Cordelia take care of him. Right? And she foils those plans, right? And he responds in this terrible, terrible fury, right, of tearing up the kingdom completely here, giving the corridor and saying, share it between you, right, to the 2 sons-in-law, right? Failing totally. It's he, and I want to stress again, the failure, I think, is his, when he asks her, but goes thy heart with this? Aye, my good Lord. So young and so untender, so young, my Lord, and true. Right? And now he's surrendering not only his kingdom, but here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity and property of blood, closeness and substance of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever. So Cordelia is cast out. Admittedly, she's taken in by France. France appreciates her. That's the interesting thing, right? That France understands. She says when Lear obviously doesn't thinks that he thinks France is too good for her, that she isn't good enough to now, particularly being dowerless, right? He says, I would not have you waste your time with her, right? France says, this is Act 1, line 238 approximately, right? Love's not love when it is mingled with regards that stands aloof from the entire point, right? In other words, and then he goes on to say, fairest Cordelia, that art most rich being poor, most choice forsaken, and most loved despised, thee and thy virtues here I seize upon, right? Okay. And there again, there's an echo of the New Testament. He was despised and rejected of men, about Jesus. There are these constant echoes, resonances throughout the play, which I think anybody, as the Elizabethans were familiar with scriptures, right, would appreciate. Now, so Cordelia is cast out. Already at the end of that first scene, we have some indication of what's going to happen, because even the sisters realize that Lear has made a mistake, right? You see how full of changes his age is, right? What poor judgment, he expressed. He has ever but slenderly known himself, the lack of self-knowledge. And Goneril says, the best and soundest of his time have been but rash. Then must we look from his age to receive not alone the imperfections of long engrafted condition. In other words, he's been like this all the time, right? Rashness. But what else will there be? The unruly waywardness that infirm and choleric years bring with them. We must think of it, think further. No, says Goneril, we must do something, and in a haste, right? So the sisters themselves realize what a mistake Lear has made, right? But their response is, we better do something about it. And they perceive the reality of Lear. They understand Lear's rashness, the haste, the thoughtlessness, the impetuousness of Lear, right? Which we have just, of course, also ourselves witnessed. Okay, I'm going to try and go a little faster, because I said otherwise we really will take a so I just want to talk about the role. I've talked about the role of language here. I want to say something about nothing. I want to go straight to the themes. I'm hoping that, as I say, I hope you've read the play, and I just want to quickly then go on to what I think are the vital points that I wanted to make. I don't know how much time you were allocating. I assume not more than an hour and a half. Right? We can always go back again afterwards. But, I mean, we'll go back and do it perhaps more fully. Excuse this turning of the pages. You can see what I did. But, and let me just take one thing, though, because I've already mentioned it. So let me just, let's just look at that. It's Act 4, Scene 3. It's a very short scene. There are a lot of short scenes here, which means there was actually great speed in going from one to the other. Act 4, Scene 3, this is the gentleman's description of how she received, how Cordelia received the news of Lear's madness or her sister's behavior. Did your letters pierce the Queen to any demonstration of grief, Kent asks. And the gentleman replies, Aye, sir, she took them read them in my presence, and now and then an ample tear trilled down her delicate cheek. It seemed she was queen over her passions, who most rebel-like sought to be king o'er her. Oh, then it moved her, not to a rage. Patience and sorrow strove, who should express her goodliest. Now look at the next lines, the simile he uses. You have seen sunshine, well, metaphor actually. You have seen sunshine and rain at once. Her smiles and tears were like a better way. Those happy smilets that played on her ripe lip seemed not to know what guests were in her eyes, which parted thence as pearls from diamonds dropped. She was smiling and weeping at the same time, but the metaphors, the imagery that he uses here also draw on nature, sunshine and rain, the ripe lip, but also on treasures, right? The tears fell from her eyes, or the tears glistened in her eyes, fell actually as pearls from diamonds. The eyes were diamonds, the tears were pearls. Again, it's a very if you like, a roundabout way, perhaps even a hyperbolic way of expressing it, because Kent then asked, made she no verbal question? Faith, once or twice she heaved the name of Father. Remember, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. She heaved the name of Father pantingly forth, as if it pressed her heart, cried, sisters, sisters, shame of ladies, sisters, Kent, Father, sisters, what i' the storm, i' the night, let pity not be believed. There she shook the holy water from her heavenly eyes, and clamour moistened. Then away she started to deal with grief alone. Again, I think that's inability to speak. The words, the single, almost monosyllabic, the questioning, the overwhelming of the inability to express herself. So language is one of the very central themes in the play, as indeed is the word never and the word nothing. But let me first just deal with another concept that recurs constantly throughout the play, and which is, I think, very difficult because a very complex concept, because it's used in so many different ways by so many different people, by various people, right? And you never quite know, we, the audience, never quite know, wait a minute, what is actually, well, perhaps not the audience, but the reader, right? And of course, here again, we have to think, when you're actually watching the play, you obviously get carried away by it, but when you read it, and if you're listening carefully, you will see that one of the words that keeps recurring is nature. Nature. Right at the beginning, when we first, well, Act 1, Scene 2, when Edmund is first alone on stage, thou nature art my goddess, right? Why should I, because I'm 11 months younger than my brother, why should I be considered base, bastard? Right? Now, what is this nature? Nature then here stands in contrast, in contradiction to, counter to law, right? He says, I, the illegitimate, will surpass the legitimate. Now my legitimate. He mocks the concept. He repeats it several times. He mocks the concept of legitimate, right? So nature here is natural instincts, even certainly something which goes counter to law. Right? It's also, however, used in the sense of the forms, the processes that produce and control all the phenomena of the natural world. Right? Everything in nature, was the way in which we sometimes use nature. forces, nature, as opposed to civilization, not just to law, but also to civilization, to culture, the cultivation, if you like. I mean, what is culture, in fact, mean culture? It's a generative force that can and does determine the quality of human beings. What is in nature makes these hard hearts is one of the questions that is posed by Lear. What is in nature makes these hard hearts, right? So what it's also used as the fundamental characteristic or character or disposition of a person's temperament, right? It's used as custom, law. It's used as the essential quality of a person. It's used as the untamed processes of forces in the universe, right? So it's used actually in contradictory senses. And we don't know. I think one of the puzzles of the play is, we're left with this question, well, what is nature? Is it a destructive force? Is it a creative force? Is it a creative force that is also destructive, that creates the no thing? Right? And think of the paradox there, something creative that also produces a negative. Right? And it's a puzzle. If I had to sum up Lear in one side, I'd put a huge question mark, right? Even though I want to show that is not the dominant trope in the play, actually. It is in Hamlet. Hamlet begins with a question, who goes there, who's there, right? And the question dominates the whole play. You all know, to be or not to be, that is the question, right? But throughout the play, question, question, question. Here, we may ultimately question, and there are questions such as what is in nature makes these hard hearts, right? But the dominant trope in Lear is the negative. It's the no, it's the nothing, it's the never, it's the no more, right? Okay. And I want, in the time that still remains, because I want to leave time for discussion as well, to come to that in a moment, right? Say a little bit more about the negation. Another issue that arises, and it's very closely connected to that one of nature, is the gods, the divine powers in this. What determines who we are? Some people say it is the stars. Gloucester, for example, he's super, he must be the sort of person who looks at his horoscope in the paper every week. Clearly, it is the stars above us govern our condition, right? Because if it weren't, nothing in nature could have created people so different from each other. The stars, okay? The gods are just, and of our this is Edgar now, the gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us. Right? He says to Edmund, the dark and vicious place where he thee got cost him his eyes. Right? It's sort of tit for tat, The gods are just. Are the gods just? And if the gods are just, why is Cordelia destroyed? Right? Why? Why does evil, in a way, right? Evil triumph? Okay. Question mark there. What is justice? That leads us on to the question of justice, right? Notice how in this play there are two trials, both of them mock trials. It's when, in his madness, Lear sets up the court to try Goneril and Regan. Who are the justices? Right? Poor Tom, a madman, or at least disguised as a madman, yes. Okay. Tom Edgar, but in fact, I mean, Lear, at this point, he is the mad beggar, right? And the fool, the professional fool. They're the judges. Lear is the prosecutor. The people who are being judged are Goneril and Regan, but this is a trial when two mad people, one mad by profession, the fool, but actually the one who speaks the most common sense in the play, right, constantly pointing out to Lear his folly. Right? Okay. So that's a travesty of a trial. Right? Okay. And then the other trial is when Cornwall and Regan try Gloucester for treason. Right? And Cornwall immediately says, of course, I can't sentence you to death, but I'm going to do whatever else is possible. And that trial ends with that terrible, bestial act, which, as I say, I just couldn't face. The blinding of Gloucester is, I think, one of the most viscerally painful, cruel acts in the whole of Shakespeare, except perhaps in Titus Andronicus, one of his early plays, which is just full of, it's a horror play. But this is a trial, this is justice, the miscarriage of justice. You can say it about the play as a whole, right? If you want to, right? Is this just? What is justice? Who has the right to try? Lear is raising this question, you know. Who are the judges? Thou caitiff, right? He says, you know, you who are judging the beadle who's whipping the whore, right? Thou lusts to use her in that sort for which thou whippst her. Basically, you really want to have sex with her, right? You're whipping her for doing it, but deep down, you'd like to be doing what she is being punished for doing. Right? What you are punishing, you are the instrument of punishment, but you are actually the wicked. Right? Change places and handy-dandy, which is the justice, which is the thief. Right? Or a dog's obeyed in office. Right? And the fool says at one point when he's threatened with the whip, right? He says, Truth's a dog must to kennel, while Lady the Bratch may stand by the fire and stink. Right? Where is justice? Who has the right to judge? And is anybody, in fact, innocent enough to pass judgment over someone else? Right? Finally, we have another kind of trial, which is what was known in medieval times, the trial by combat. Right? You prove the crime, the criminality, the guilt of one person by the single combat. Right? So Edgar, as it were, the representative of truth at this point, the knight-errant, comes forward. It's a very interesting question. How come Edmund doesn't recognize Edgar, right? Well, this is something you have to think about. Is it because in production Edgar comes in wearing a helmet or some form of disguise is a very important theme in this book. I keep coming back to the themes. Things are not what they seem, right? People are not what they look like. Edmund, for example, I would say, is the perfect example of someone who we know is not what he seems. He's like Iago in that respect. There are two other villains in Shakespeare who, as one critic put it, who make us take the evil in our minds, because they're constantly informing us, the audience, ahead of time of what they're going to do, which adds tremendous dramatic irony, because we always know that there's deception going on, but the people who are being deceived don't. He makes it quite clear at the beginning what his purposes are, right? and the way in which he smooth talks his way into the favors of people, the way in which he deceives his own father into instantly believing that Edgar, the good son, is out to get his life and to inherit the wealth, right? And you think to yourself, just as Lear is so easily deceived, so is Gloucester. The way in which these two plots, as it were, the main plot and the parallel plot, I wouldn't even call it a subplot, right? Cast light upon each other is so fascinating, right? The ability to deceive with words. But as I say, in Edmund's case, we're always one step ahead because we know what he's doing and we can see his treachery. And the way in which he constantly says, the other two villains, by the way, are Richard III and Iago. With Richard III and Iago, they always tell us, the audience, what they're planning to do, right? Which adds enormous tension to the play as we see how the heroes how gullible they are, how easily they're deceived, right? And we see the weakness of those characters because we know that they are falling victim to a deception. Right? It's enormous dramatic irony there.